bit, that computer's very slow. A little bit about the timeline or what we're going to go over. I've got quite a few slides, and you know how much I like to talk, so I'll try to move through them pretty briskly. But first and foremost, it's not just a, now that we got back from the trip, wanted to look through our photo album type presentation. The most important thing, I think, is outlining what we've done with the Global Food Production Program. So I'm going to start off and tell you about that. Then, of course, there will be a lot of pictures, and just going to kind of walk you through what we did this last May whenever we did this adventure. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact in terms of what the students thought who participated in the program and what we thought as faculty members of leading people, and then tell you a bit about where we're going to go with the program next and entertain any questions. So I thought it was important. This is one of the things that we started talking about whenever we were advertising and thinking about this program initially. This is the mission statement of NDSU, and one of the pieces in here is this: being well-rounded world citizens and successful professionals. And I think now more than ever, there's two areas that we need to start focusing on in education, which we already do, but this program helps bolster. One is getting students to think critically. Not just thinking about what's in the book, but being able to apply what they've learned and think about how that all works. And two, being able to put that into some type of a global perspective. And that's really what the goal of our program is to be able to combine those two skill sets and think about what's going on. And certainly in our field, in agriculture, we're in the business of feeding people. And China, I'll talk about why we chose that here in just a minute, but with 1.3 billion mouths to feed, certainly is a big impact area of the world that would really help us to focus this type of program and get these critical thinking skills to move forward. You know, there's been research done by many different universities talking about the value of study abroad. And we've seen people talk about the value of being on judging teams and travel and what it does for people. And this is just some research bullets from some publications that we've gone through. Some of this was actually done by Newell Wright. If you know Newell, he's in the business school down at Berry Hall, and he's taken over 1,000 NDSU students abroad. And he's published a lot of research on data they collected from those students. And you see it's just talking down a long line of things that studying abroad brings value to you with. And this is something I said in a class yesterday I was talking to about next year's trip. It doesn't mean that if you don't study abroad that you don't have all these valuable skill sets. It's just another set of tools, arsenal for your toolbox, if you will, to help really tie the educational piece together. And I think that's what really brings value to the students. And if you become more philanthropic, that's great, because then you can help us fund the program in future years, right? The Global Food Production Systems Program is the name that we came up with for this program. Back in 2009, when I was hired onto the faculty, one of the things that I talked about was really wanting to be able to develop a study abroad program. And for me personally, some of my background, and really the things I believe that led me to become a faculty member at NDSU, working on my PhD, all started with study abroad myself. I studied abroad to much less cultural places like China. Whenever I was at the University of Missouri, I started off with a study abroad program to Ireland. But then that in the future kind of sparked my interest in working abroad and studying abroad, and I ended up moving and living into the Netherlands and doing some meat science work that I think really kind of sparked my interest into doing some of the things that we do today. So I've talked to Greg about it a lot. One of the things is talking about a program that's not isolated just to graduate students or undergraduate students or specifically to the animal science department. It's something that's campus-wide but has an emphasis. And in our case, it's the producing food, feeding the world program that we really focus on. So our goals of this program, one, are to expose students to the global factors that affect the world food supply. Two is this cultural diversity, talking about all the things that are wrapped into being part of the agricultural system, and certainly in the U.S. in a variety of businesses or fields that we all practice within. we can't exist without international business. Just me and my field of being in swine and in pork, 26% in 2013 will be the percent of U.S. pork that is exported globally. So if we lose that market, we're done. Even if we have people who never study or live abroad, I think, and I think that most people in here would agree, that it's important that students get that kind of opportunity or experience so that they can realize what is happening abroad does affect them, even if you're back on the farm, even if you're in the university system or anywhere else. What's happening in China, India, Africa, all these other places around the world directly affects us in agriculture right here. And of course, there's this piece about the mild culture shock experience. And I've never even read on culture shock before, but we were only in China for 15 days, and that's actually, scientists say that's about whenever you start to experience culture shock. Whenever you start to realize that this is real, I'm here, the new is wearing off. But China, for our group of students, I think did present a little bit of culture shock. And just the demographics of our students, we had less than 3 students who had ever traveled abroad. That's not including Canada, right? Only one, I believe, or one student had traveled to Europe. No one had traveled to Asia or Africa or Russia or anywhere else. And over half of the students who went had never flown. So this was a pretty big cultural experience day one, because if you know, now they have nonstop, starting in 2012, they have nonstop flights from Detroit to Beijing. So for your first time flying on your very first day, was Minneapolis to Detroit to Beijing, 14-hour flight from Detroit to Beijing. So it was a pretty interesting experience, along with many of the other things that we're going to talk about. And so one of the goals, though, outside of this program, and Carl worked on this program with me, so did Kristen, and so did Roberta, and so did a lot of people in the department and around the college. But one of the big things Carl and I have really preached from the beginning is we want to make this a program that's accessible to all students. One of the things that we heard whenever we first started working on this program was Newell, for example, Dr. Wright, has taken a lot of students abroad, but oftentimes those students who travel in those type of programs are students of means. Those are $10,000, $12,000 programs. That's not something that typically students in our field can afford, is to fork out $10,000 to live, you know, abroad in France for 3 or 4 months. So Carl and I talked a lot about how can we really push this program to students so that they can afford it. And I can tell you, we tried a lot of creative funding ideas. Some of the students did fundraisers on their own. They went to their local banks, their local elevators. We wrote letters. We called people. We sold a lot of pizza corner pizzas. Anything we could do to try to offset the cost. And there were some opportunities within the department. We have one small scholarship within the department. And that's something that we're going to try to build on in the future. So the Global Food Production Systems is more than just 2 weeks. It is a course. It's a 3-credit course that we set up with distance and continuing education. And for our new curriculum in animal science that requires an internship, if students enroll in the class, so it starts before the summer comes along, that actually substitutes that internship requirement. So it does have some added value to students who are getting a degree specific to animal science. That 3 credits started long before we ever traveled to China. We hosted weekly meetings starting after Valentine's Day every Monday night. And those meetings were pre-planning for travel, explaining the logistics of how we were going to move throughout China. Simple yet complicated things like filling out visa applications and passport applications, and explaining to them how things work in the airport and luggage and all these complicated things. But the other thing we did is we wanted to bring in people to really set the stage of why this experience was important. And you see there's a long line of people here. Rex, I didn't forget you. You got the president and the dean.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
President and the dean. That's pretty good. Literally, we had people, including our agricultural commissioner, Doug Goring from North Dakota. They had just been on a trade mission to China and been to a lot of the places that we were about to go to. President Brashani, Vice President Grafton. We also had some people with the North Dakota Trade Office that came in and talked, and those people are also helping us arrange things in China. But what we wanted to do is not just throw the students in, but rather kind of set a precedence to say, you know, you're gonna experience this yourself, but before you ever go, we want you to hear from some people in North Dakota or Minnesota that talk about the importance of a program like this. And we feel that that was very successful, and actually it was essential in the long run, because before we ever took off, we also got to know the students a little bit. You know, we actually knew them by name before we had to be screaming it in the airport or elsewhere. And that was important because when you're there for 15 days, you really needed, I felt like you needed that bonding experience with the students. One, more than anything, was to build trust, because we did talk with parents and people who were, well, is this safe? Is this safe? I don't even know you. You're taking them to China and traveling throughout the country. And so we were trying to ease some of that by having these pre-meetings and showing that we were well prepared on the way in. For the planning meetings, we had the travel documents, of course, thanks to Lisa and Megan and Rayanne especially. It was a nightmare filling out 24 visa applications, multiple times, by the way. We didn't always get them right the first time. So a lot of that was really complicated, and it took a lot of people in the department to get it done. For luggage, you see this picture right here? That is all the luggage 24 people took to China for 15 days. We only allowed one carry-on. Just because we were flying between different places, we didn't want to be tracking down luggage, and the jaws really dropped whenever we told them that. But I think in the long run, unless some of the students are here today, it proved to be beneficial. Plus, we gave them 2 shirts. And they were those mesh polo shirts from the Animal Science Department that wash very well in the sink at night and dry. So they didn't have to worry about it because we told them what they were going to wear. Literally, we gave them an itinerary that said, here's what you're going to wear today. And I think every day but 2, they wore those NDSU shirts. So they instantly cut down the amount that they had to pack. For the tour, we used a company called EF Tours. I'm not sure if you've ever seen them, but they're the largest language company in the world. Over $5 billion company. And in most other countries, China, Africa, Russia, they're known as English first. In the US, it's known as education first. And basically what they are is, they are the hands-on Rosetta Stone. They do language schools for people, I think they have over 30 locations just in China. But as a part of their business, they also run a tour company for high school and college students. And I put down here on the end, you know, it really proved to be a priceless tool that we used. We had 24 hours a day, we had someone who could interpret for us, who could line up our buses, line up all of our arrangements, and literally it was a pay one fee that got you into everything. That was the bus, the plane, the meals, the flights. There were no surprises once we hit the ground, which really proved to be a very useful tool. And this guy right here in the middle, John, was our tour guide, and Rex could probably attest that he was a very, very good person. Even whenever we had some problems with some visas and other things we're traveling there, he was just taken care of, and that gave us, Carl and Roberta and Kristen and I, more of an opportunity to focus on what we were there for. And that was the agricultural side of the program. So we made this custom itinerary that kind of blended some of the things that EF Tours does in China already. Okay, so there was the 24 people, minus this guy, and I have no idea who that is. Right? But this was our group. Whenever we took off, after we'd been there a few days, I can make a rickshaw look very, very small. This was our itinerary on how it worked. We flew into Beijing initially, and we did some touring there, and I'm going to kind of walk you through how and what we did while we were there. Then we flew to Xi'an, and from Xi'an, right here in the Shanxi province, just to give you a perspective, just in the Shanxi province right there, they produce about 360 million pigs annually. 360 million. We produce 150 million in the whole United States. So,
How big is that?
how big is this area?
Like, what state?
That would probably be about the size of Minnesota, North Dakota, and South Dakota if you were to stack them on. It's a pretty good sized area. But-
Does it smell?
I'm sorry?
Does it smell?
No, it doesn't. Of course not. It smells like money. Right? And it's not just swine though. It just has a huge growth in agriculture, and I'll show you some pictures of that whenever we get there. And then we flew to Shanghai. Of course, the financial, I mean, very western city, but we flew to Shanghai, and then we went down to Hangzhou by bus. And between all those places, though, was air travel. And if you've been to China, you know the infrastructure is very different. You can't just get on a bus and drive from here to here. That is not going to happen. So you could take the train, but flights were actually pretty reasonable, and EF Tours arranged all that. Long before we left, everything was set, so that's how we travel. So getting into the itinerary, I'm not going to read all this off, but it was an action-packed trip. And on the left-hand side is most of the cultural things that we showed the students and got to experience. And on the right-hand side are the agricultural companies or entities that Carl and I worked with while we were there, and the students. And that included industry and academia. And basically, we went for a day doing something cultural, a day doing something agricultural focused, a day cultural, something agricultural focused. It would be a shame to go to China and just look at pigs and beef and dairy and feed and not see some of the things that we got to see, which include 2 of the 8 wonders of the world. So pretty amazing. I'm going to go through each spot, but I'm going to focus more on the agriculture, but I just thought it would be good to include some of the cultural things that we saw, because I know there are students who are interested maybe in doing this in 2013, because we are going back to China this coming May, again, on a very similar itinerary, something that I'll talk about at the end. But, of course, things started out in Beijing, and you go to right in the center of Beijing is Tiananmen Square, the largest public gathering place in the world. 1 million people can stand there shoulder to shoulder. The Forbidden City, this is a very amazing place, and it's really amazing just the sheer size of Tiananmen Square. And I can remember the very first time I went there was in 2007 with Dr. Berg, and we ate at KFC on the corner of Tiananmen Square, which is pretty amazing. But it would take you just to go through the Forbidden City, which no commoner was allowed into the Forbidden City until 1949. Before then, it was completely run by the emperors of China before Mao. This is a picture of Mao right there on the outside of the palace. But I think they said just to go through the Forbidden City, if you were going to just walk in and out of every room, would take you 3 days. So it is massive and very interesting. So we started in Beijing and we did that. Then we went to the Chinese Agricultural University, which NDSU has a partnership, has a memorandum of understanding with the CAU. And we started by going to the Agricultural Economics School at CAU, and then we went to the Animal Science Department after that. And these are the slides that, for this presentation, I told you I'm going to focus on the most. And this slide right here is a picture of a PowerPoint that was given, but what's outlined on that PowerPoint is the key phrases of the #1 documents. And what the #1 document is essentially every year in China, the government comes together and says, what is the absolute #1 thing we need to focus on for our population of almost 1.4 billion people? And even though you may not be able to read this, the top one is in 2004. It was increasing farmers' income, and I'm going to go subsequent years. Improving the agricultural production capacity. Pushing forward the new countryside scheme, developing modern agriculture, consolidating the foundation of agriculture, improving the rural development and farmers' income, balancing the urban and rural development. All of the #1 directives since 2004 have been something focused on agriculture and feeding their population, which was something very applicable for our students to see, and for us, for that matter, to hear that straight from some of the professors there at CAU. And Carl and I gave some presentations while we were there as well. And very interesting to learn about the government and the dynamics of feeding such a massive population. It was very, very interesting. And this was kind of the beginning of a lot of very interesting meals for some of the students, and most of them fared very well. But the Chinese this year are just extremely hospitable, very, very nice people, and we were treated nice by everyone there, given lots of opportunities to have free meals and interact with students, which is something that we did whenever we got over to the Animal Sciences Department of CAU. Just their Animal Science Department, it's about the size of India's campus, by the way. It's a lot of buildings and a lot of structure, but I think this was a very eye-opening experience for everyone. We gave some presentations while we were in the Animal Sciences Department, and many of the faculty came, but it was amazing how many students came just to practice English and visit with the students that we brought in our group. So we had the students go around and tell where they're from, and the same with the students who were there from the CAU. And of course, everyone was speaking English just fine, and we had a lot of interaction with the students. And this was maybe one of the most valuable aspects in the very beginning of the project, was watching the students interact. It was really amazing. They broke into small groups, and they were exchanging cards and talking about, you know, the things that are going on in ag. And one of the interesting things we found is we had the students go around the table and say, how many of you have a background in agriculture, like your family's involved in farming, or you work on the farm? And of course, all 20 students at the table of ours raised their hand. And these people were flabbergasted. I mean, they could not believe that there were that many students that had a direct involvement in agriculture. So there were about 45 students in the room, and we asked them, raise your hand if you come from a family involved in agriculture. If you're one generation removed, no hands. 2, no hands. 3, no hands. 4, no hands, until we got out to 5 generations removed. In the Animal Science Department, focusing on some type of hands-on knowledge of livestock production or hands-on agriculture. And it was just a completely different, I would say mindset, but just a completely different scenario of the type of students that were in the college and in the Animal Sciences Department. And they were just very interested in hearing from this group of students who were actually from a real farm. A real farm. It was pretty amazing. After that, we went down, we went through their facilities. These were some of their metabolism chambers, and this was their part of their ruminant nutrition facility. And not to say or bring anything down, but I think it was an eye-opening experience for the students who are used to working in our facilities. It was a night and day difference, to say the least. A night and day difference. The facilities were not what we're used to seeing here, and I think the most interesting part is that if you're in China, you're talking with the Department of Agriculture there. This is the #1 university in China when it comes to animal science programs, followed by some of the other universities like where Rex was at in Nanjing, which is just north of Shanghai, that focuses mostly on meat science specifically. But the people there, again, were very, very hospitable. We gave some talks, and it was really interesting to get a perspective from the students. After that, Great Wall of China, always a very interesting time. And of course, you've all seen pictures of the Great Wall, but I have to point out this one right here. And I told you, none of the students were had never been exposed to a culture like the Chinese. And so we told them before we went, like, when you go to the Great Wall especially, it's going to be a little bit like you're a rock star. And it was kind of like, oh, that's funny. Like, no, really, it really will be like that. So we all, you know, we hit the wall and it's crazy, and there's literally hundreds of thousands of people there. And as you're going up the wall, it's just like people are just getting stopped and taking pictures, And this is one of our students, Kelsey Self. Some of you know Kelsey, some of you may not, but Kelsey had never been to an airport before, literally. And it was talk about coming out of your shell. In the very beginning, she was a little worried about people. They were all wanting to get around in groups and, you know, get pictures with the Americans. And but by the end, and she was really loving that. She was running up to people, putting her hand around, getting pictures, and so It was a really good experience, and I think it was funny. And Luke here, Mr. Feldbaum, in the corner, turns out that the Chinese women, they really liked everything he's got going on. He was a pretty popular man. Whenever we got to CAU, we almost had to leave him there. So he was a very popular man. After that, we hooked up with some of our industry partners, and we hooked up with Chris Darling. I don't know, some of you may know Chris. He's been in North Dakota before, but he works for Land O'Lakes, and he's huge in agricultural development in China. And he has some North Dakota ties. He's actually from Jersey originally. He's a city boy from Jersey, but his very first job with Land O'Lakes was buying field peas in Crosby, North Dakota, and shipping them to China. And so he got to know Vern Anderson very well and developed some India-issue relations because he didn't know anything about field peas going in. And now he's in charge of a huge agricultural directive that Land O'Lakes has in China, literally investing billions of dollars. And since the melamine scare in China with milk, they've done a huge expansion of the dairy industry. This is about an hour and a half due east of Beijing, where the Husha Dairy Farm, which is part of Land O'Lakes, and some of the other companies went, they've got an 8,000 cow dairy. And they're putting up a lot of these. And the reason why is because after the milk scare, they really have a lot of faith in companies that are under control of American companies. They perceive that as being very food safe. Because what was happening is on these smaller dairies, whenever they would come in and pick up milk, they would pick it up and then they would go to another facility and they would dilute it with water, and then they would haul it to another processing facility. Same thing with hay. They would buy in high quality alfalfa hay from either the United States or Russia or elsewhere, but before it ever got to the farm, there was a middleman bringing in the hay, opening all the bales, adding ditch hay, what we would call ditch hay, back into it, low quality forage, doubling the quantity and selling it at a high price. And it was pretty amazing the type of quality control. I mean, this was a dairy that you would see anywhere in the United States. Very well ran, very well operated, and they came up with a great name, Wonder Milk. Everybody likes that. So that was actually, I think, the only milk I drank whenever we were in China. But it was pretty interesting. I took a picture down here of the hay. All of that alfalfa hay is coming out of California and Oregon. And whenever we were there, which was the last part of May, they were paying $500 a ton. They were burning through $350,000 a month in hay on the dairy farm.
So there is no Chinese hay?
There is not a lot of high quality hay. And because, again, of the infrastructure, they can't load it on anything but a train. There is a lot of hay out in Inner Mongolia and other places, but there's no way to transport large quantities of hay from there to the dairy farms back on the eastern side of China. So what they're doing instead, Land O'Lakes has a huge initiative of building dairy farms and beef operations out in Inner Mongolia. It'd be a lot cheaper to ship the milk and the product back into China from those regions. And that's actually something that we've been working with Chris on. Is he wants us, when we come back in 2013, to potentially take this out to Inner Mongolia for a couple of days, where they're building these huge irrigated farms. I mean, very modern equipment. They send a lot of people to Big Iron, for example, every year to buy a lot of used American equipment, and they're shipping it out there to Kazakhstan and Inner Mongolia and those areas. And down here on the bottom left, that is a picture of a worm farm. So at the dairy, all that compost is being, they bring all the compost out and they lay it on top of irrigated pipe, and then they populate these worms into the piles. And then they harvest those worms like 6 weeks after they're put into the pile and use it all for cosmetics. And they also had a methane digester there, which was pretty interesting because they had spent more than $500,000 on the methane digester, but turns out after they built it, they didn't know how to build it nor how to operate it. And I think that's kind of interesting because we saw that in a lot of the industry we went to while we were there. If it sounds good, there's lots of money from the government. With that kind of directive, there was a lot of things being built, but they didn't have the type of consulting expertise necessarily to always put these things together. After the dairy farm, on the same day, we went down to another piece of the Land O'Lakes initiative, which is called their Great Wall Enterprises. This was a very modern, fairly new feed mill that's about an hour and a half south of Beijing. This was a pretty long day. Very standard in terms of feed mixing. This semi up here is distiller's grains. They were providing the feed that went back onto the dairy farms, the calf starters. They were making swine feed and other things. Very, very nice.